This problem with thought domination. It's a byproduct of man's disconnection from the source of life. It's something we have struggled with for millennia, untold millennia. And its momentum has increased with the passing of each generation. Do you realize that our minds today are cluttered with far more information than at any previous time in human history? And this information that our minds are cluttered with is not that useful. Now, that self-nature, that carnal nature, that ego, and everyone in the last several weeks has been so concerned about the Ebola virus, about it getting into the United States, about it causing mass infections. And of course, it is so sad that several thousand people in Africa have lost their lives, yes. And now several in the United States, healthcare workers, were infected by Ebola. But there's a virus that has more than infected several thousand people. It's infected billions of people. Everyone who's ever lived, everyone who's alive now, all who will be born after us. We could call it the Egola virus. the ego, whatever term you use for it, the old man. Paul said the old man, the unrenewed mind, the carnal nature. All of these are terms dealing with this inward awryness, this thing in us that's off, this thing that we've experienced that we know is not really us, even though most of the time it has convinced us that we are those thoughts that are being thought in our head. But you sooner or later begin to see through that because, thought has told you this, that, or the other thing is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, the thing you were worried about. It's very interesting in Matthew 6 that the King James translators, where Jesus said, do not be anxious about tomorrow, do not be anxious over the future, and don't be anxious about your life, how you will live or what you will wear. Don't be anxious, the newer translations say. And that's not a wrong translation. The Greek word there, I looked it up, and it does mean to become anxious. So the Greek translation of the Aramaic text, the Aramaic, the actual language Jesus spoke, that beautiful sermon on the hillside that day, that Greek translation of don't be anxious is good. However, the King James translation, Jesus is recorded as saying, therefore I say unto you, take no thought for the morrow. He said, take no thought for your life. Take no thought. How beautiful is that? That thoughts come up to the mind, constantly presenting themselves to the mind. And when we're living unconsciously, we reach up and take them. We identify with them. And they become us. That's how we see ourselves as being. And we paint all these scenarios in the head as to what is going to unfold. And very rarely do things turn out as we thought they would. How many times have we said that? Well, it actually turned out better than I thought it would. I've heard Christians say that all these decades in ministry. Oh, praise the Lord, I was so worried about such and such situation with my son and his wife and their family. Well, it turned out better than I thought it would. See, the mind is a poor prognosticator. It is a poor predictor of future events. How many times have we thought things would go a different way than the way they actually turned out? And all through that time, when we had taken that thought, our minds were spinning around that thought, and that thought was actually controlling us, dominating us, disturbing us. Do you realize how few Christians live in peace? Paul said, live in peace, and the God of love and peace shall be with you, in his benediction to the church at Corinth in the second letter. Live in peace. Do you realize how few actually live in peace? Instead, their lives are full of turmoil, disturbance, and there are many devout people who have unknowingly become addicted to the inner drama of the mind. They have to have a story going on in the head. They can't ever be right here, right now, with God in the present moment, with the one who said, I am that I am. Instead of being in the present with God, where faith and trust abide and where you live in repose, that your trust is in God, the ego, the self, the carnal mind, tries to figure out scenarios and position oneself in the best opportunity for achieving that goal in the future. It's like, here is our body in the present, and here is our mind in the future. And we wonder why so little of the life that Jesus promised. He promised life abundant. But we wonder why there is so little of that abundance of life within us. You cannot live pleasing to God and therefore enjoy life and peace. You cannot be spiritually minded, as Paul said there in Romans 8, verse 6 and following. You can't be spiritually minded, enjoying life and peace, when you're off in the future, or when you're dragged down by the past. Because most people I know believe that the past actually is a reality presently. That the past somehow is existing somewhere, and they've even talked about going back in time. No one's ever been able to do that. Do you know why? Because it doesn't exist. Never will exist. The only place going back in the time exists is in people's minds. And yeah, books have been written, fictional books. Movies have been made, time traveling. And that may be harmless because we realize, most of us, that that's just the imagination. And the imagination is fickle. Who can trust the imagination? Imagination is that storytelling part of the unrenewed mind where we get into daydreams and reliving. We don't like certain things that happened in our history. And we try our best somehow to go back in our minds and make the right choice. We can never do that, but we don't believe that there is no judgment, no condemnation, no unforgiveness by God. That there is any unforgiveness of things that are past that we've committed to Him. Somehow we believe that those mistakes, those wrong deeds are still existing and haven't been washed away by the blood of Christ. That's what I'm trying to say. And so what we do then is some people live in this cycle of going back in the past in their mind and saying no at the marriage altar. I'm not going to marry you. Or going before that and saying, no, I don't accept the engagement. This is a wrong decision. And even there you were misled by your mind. Your mind painted a rosy scenario of future events, of how things would play out. And even when a person has married in accordance with divine will, there are still tests and trials because it's part of the schooling of life to bring us into a better place in God, in each of us. And this is where the past is useful. The past is useful because we can look back and see how that even though the enemy meant it for evil, and sometimes people under the direction of darkness meant certain things for evil, God was greater than it all. He's even greater than we ourselves. That's the beautiful thing about it. We're so limited, we're so needful in dependence upon Him. The beautiful thing about it is how then that we can just yield it all. And then we can look back with some objectivity and say, like Joseph, you meant it for evil, but God intended it for good.